So welcome back to SUP'S Garage. Today we got another R1 2004 to 2006, and what I wanted to show you on this video is, as you can see, this is already torn apart. We got our oil water pump here and all the components that come out of it right underneath the engine. And the reason I'm showing you on this video, guys, if for some reason you have a leak in this area here, if you have a coolant leak, that's actually a lot simpler. You're just gonna have to take out all the coolant out of your bike, disconnect this hose here. The only thing you have to replace is a rubber seal that sits on this tube that goes back in there into the water pump here. But if you have an oil leak, that's what this video is about, because unfortunately it's not as simple as the coolant leak. You gotta do all this, take all this apart just for a seal that actually sits right here on this lip. And the only way you can get in there to replace it is you have to take all this out, because it actually sits on this outer lip here. And obviously the only way you're gonna get access to that seal is if you get this out, and then you're gonna be able to use a pick or a flathead screwdriver to get that seal out. Mine's already removed, but I will be showing you when I put it back on. There's a little bit more work involved than just dropping down the oil pan and getting the water pump slash oil pump out, because the water pump's actually on this side and the oil pump is on this side, which I think is pretty cool. But in order to get this out, as you can see, there's a gear here. Well, that gear is tied up to this gear on top, and the oil pump sits down there, by the way. And in order to get to that, you got to get all that out. Clutch baskets, clutch, obviously the clutch cover. But if you're willing to do this on your own, I'm going to show you how to put all this back together, which should save you a lot of money. If you're gonna go this deep into any bike, really, it's best to go ahead and replace all the gaskets, because you don't want to take a risk putting all this back together and find out there's a leak somewhere, and you're gonna have to repeat the entire process again. So make it easy on yourself. Just replace everything that you think that should be replaced. In my case, I'm replacing all the gaskets that I had to remove. And with all honesty, with shipping, I spent probably around $65 to $70 on all the gaskets that I need. And luckily for you, I will be putting down the part numbers on all the gaskets that you're gonna need to make it a little bit easier for you if you decide to do this on your own. So other than that, let's get started. Okay, so I'm gonna try to be as detailed as possible. So obviously the first seal that we're gonna start off with is the whole reasoning why we're doing this. And just to let you know, this seal that we are actually doing all this work for is actually less than $5. Yeah, that kind of sucks, but at least the part is cheap. So the first thing we're gonna do is put some oil, or maybe some grease if you have any, all around the gasket, but we don't take any risk when we're putting back the water pump back in here, and it doesn't cause any damage to the seal. And it's pretty simple how to put it back in, by the way. You just put the ring in there like I'm doing now. All right, so we got our new seal in, and while it's in there, I'm gonna go ahead and put a little bit more grease in there just to play it safe. All right, now that we got that seal in there, I'm going to continue taking off this pipe here, because there's two seals that we got to replace on this one. And this pipe is a little bit of a pain to get out, because the way they designed this, the rubber hose that sits here, it doesn't give you much room to go down or up. So just be careful not to rip this. I'm going to go ahead and remove mine so I can continue on putting on the new seals. Okay, so I already removed the tube. Also, I've already cleaned it. Go ahead and take some time to make sure that this is nice and clean. You don't want any dirt and debris getting inside your coolant system. So this is one of the two gaskets that we are going to be replacing. Go ahead and just use a flat screwdriver or anything to make it easy for you to remove and get it out of there. We're going to go ahead and put the new one on there, and remember, just put a little bit of grease on there just to play it safe, that we don't want to take any chances of damaging the gasket. We're going to slide it all the way back into the tube, and it just sits in that little groove there, the same groove you took the old one out. There we go. So there's our new one there, and we're going to go ahead and install the other one as well that sits in the front here. And we're just going to put this one in here, and it just sits right here on this lip here. This part here is what's going to sit inside the water pump as well. This right here just seals it from the actual bottom of the engine casing. All right, now we're ready to put it back on. Okay, so now that we have all our gaskets on our tube, at this point it's a lot easier, because we've already removed this, to put the water pump back in place, and then we can install this tube back in. Otherwise, it's going to be a hassle if you have this sticking out while you're trying to put the pump back in. So just be sure you clean the areas where the gaskets will be sitting, because again, you don't want to get any dirt in between the new gaskets. So we're going to start off by putting the water pump back in place, and the way you do that is obviously this section here goes into that side, and the other pipe goes into the front side. And be careful that you go in a straight angle, not on a side or tilt angle, because you will damage that seal and you're gonna have to buy a new one. Now we're gonna go ahead and put the tube in like so. Let's go ahead and put the chain back on. I find it that the easiest way to do this is go ahead and put the chain on the bottom of the gear first. Then you could put the chain on the top gear. Now there is some kind of bearing that we have to put back on here, but make sure you do not have it when you're installing the chain. Otherwise it's going to be really hard to put that chain back on. Start off by putting it on one side and then just simply rotate the gear So we could go ahead and leave this part alone for now. We're gonna go ahead and put our 2 bolts that actually hold the pump to the bottom of the engine back on, for it could make it easier for us to continue putting on this pipe back into the water pump. Now for the 2 bolts we'll be putting back in, they are the same sizes. I would just recommend you dry these up pretty good, and if you have some kind of sealant, go ahead and put some on. Sometimes you still have some from removing it. In this case, I'm gonna leave mine how it is. There is a spacer that goes to one of these bolts, just like that. The one that uses the spacer is towards the front of the engine, and it's pretty obvious to know which spacer goes because obviously the spacer is not gonna fit on the back one. So I'm gonna go ahead and install my 2 bolts now. We're gonna go ahead and put the front bolt, which is the one with the spacer, and the back bolt goes right here in this section. And that's gonna be followed with a size 5 Allen key. Now I do not have the specs on retightening all these bolts, but if this is your first time, you wanna make sure you do that right. I would highly recommend you go ahead and go that route. Now don't tighten one side tighter than the other for now. Just snug one and then start on the other one, and then repeat the process one more time just to make sure that the bolts are evenly tightened on both sides. Okay, at this point now we can put our coolant pipe back into the water pump slowly. I just like to tap on it lightly to make sure it's all the way in place. There we go, we should be good. Now I just got to put that bolt in to hold it in. And at this point, you can go ahead and tighten the 2 hoses that are sitting on top of this pipe. Go ahead and install the bolt that holds the coolant tube that we just put in. Okay, the next thing we're gonna be putting on is this tube here. And it's only one-way fit. And this one's gonna also have the same size bolt, but it is a smaller one. Just be sure you place it in the hole it's supposed to sit in, which is back here. I'm not sure if I can show that very well on camera. You can see if you follow that pipe, there's the slot that it actually sits in. So just be sure that it does sit in the slot and not just outside of it. All right, moving on to the next part we're gonna put on is this little tube here. And this one also has 2 gaskets that I am replacing. So make sure you replace those as well. So I didn't get to put this part on camera, but basically this tube here is only held by 2 bolts. And it's really hard to get this part confused because this part is a one-way fit. So if you try to put it on the wrong way, the holes for the bolts won't line up. And you know right then and there that you just need to flip the tube around. Again, just be sure to clean those bolts before you install them, and if necessary, go ahead and add some torque seal if you need to. Okay, our last piece is going to be the oil strainer. Just make sure that there's no pieces in the bottom. If you have any dirt or any small pieces stuck on the bottom, now's the time to clean it out. Okay, so before we put our oil pump strainer back in, obviously I already cleaned the bottom of mine, but there's also a gasket that I will be replacing here as well, and it only has one. Simply just put the new one in. Now that we have the new one in place, let's go put it back on the bike. For this piece, it's fairly simple. And this piece is actually gonna have 3 bolts. 2 that go to the top and 1 that goes on the bottom. The 2 bolts that go on top go right here, and then the bottom one bolts down right here. All right, so the next part we're gonna be putting back together is the right side of the engine where the clutch basket goes. And the reason why I wanna do this next and not continue on the bottom end is because just in case this chain here gets loose on the bottom gear or the oil pump, it's gonna be real hard for me to make sure it's on right without having access to the bottom, because right now the bottom is still open. So the first part we will be putting on is this spacer here that actually slides inside this gear that holds it in place. It goes in just like that. Next, we want to make sure that that chain is actually in place with both gears now. After that, we're going to go ahead and continue putting the bracket that actually holds the chain in place. It's going to be this piece here, and it does show the word up. There's a little tab here. That tab actually sits in this hole here to hold it in place. Want to make sure that those chains sit on both of these slots. And then there's 2 bolts that actually hold it down. We're going to put those 2 bolts in. Again, make sure that they are clean, and if necessary, put some more torque seal. And it's going to be the same size we've been using since the beginning of this video. Like we've been doing, go ahead and make one side snug first, and then snug the other side, and then retie both. Okay, the next piece we're going to be putting in is this bearing here, and just be careful that none of these fall out. And slide that in there. Sits just like that. Now you're going to see on this gear that it has 2 grooves. Those 2 grooves actually have to sit on either one of these. All right, so big tip here, guys. You want to make sure that the gear on the clutch basket aligns flush with the crankshaft gear. So just keep that in mind before you move on forward, because if that does not sit correctly, you're going to find out once you put all this back together that the clutch will not work like it should. We're going to slide it in place, and we're going to feel for it to snap in. And there it is. All right, we got our clutch basket in. Next piece is this part here, but before you put that part in, there's a washer that sits in the back of it. Make sure you put this one in place, and it looks like it's either or side for this one. That just sits there just like that, flush. And then we set this piece in. Next is gonna be this washer. Now this washer has a bigger lip on one side and a smaller lip on the other. You're gonna put the big side towards the engine. Next, we're gonna put this washer and it shows the word out on it. Obviously that's gonna be facing you. Then we're gonna put the nut back on. Now they do have a tool that holds this clutch basket in place, but in my case, I don't have that tool. I'm gonna use this just to hold the wheel from turning, and it'll allow me to tighten this bolt, keeping the basket from spinning. I got top and bottom already tapped in. Next, we're gonna put all the clutches back in along with the metal spacers, one by one. Now you will have a flat side on these metal spacers. You're not gonna be able to tell on camera. The flat side goes towards the engine and the round side goes towards you. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so if you install all your clutches and the spacers in between correctly, you should have just enough space to put the last plate on. Next, we're gonna put this plate back in. It's gonna be a spring followed by a bolt. We're just gonna hand tie them for now. Okay, once we got them hand tied, we're gonna go ahead and tighten these in the star pattern one by one until they're all tight. I did not buy the seal for this one because technically the one I have is still good to use again, but I'm gonna go ahead and add the part number on this one as well, just in case you wanna go ahead and play it safe and buy a new one. What I will be doing, because obviously there are some parts that look a little bit worn out, is just add sealer all the way around, just a little layer of it just to cover all the silver, and also the same on the clutch cover as well. Therefore, once this is in the center, it'll have a layer on both sides, making sure that this will be sealed correctly. Don't forget to put your pins in there. If you didn't have them on, now's the time to put them back in. Therefore, you don't put this all back together and find out that you have these somewhere laying around. I'm just gonna set my gasket in there, ready for the clutch cover to just be put on at this point. This pin actually has to sit exactly on the spot for this little piece can slide in. As you can see, the gears in there to be exactly meshed in there. Therefore, we can put this cover in and then we can put all the bolts in. So once you have your pin where you think it's pretty much in place, we're gonna put this cover on and we're gonna mess with the shaft up until we feel like it grabs, and then we're gonna push all the way in. All right, and you'll know that it grabs because as soon as you turn this, you can just feel it just pull against the actual shaft that's sticking out. Now at this point, we're gonna try to push it in there to where it sits flush, like so. So in this case, it's already in there, it's already in the pin, but obviously this is not adjusted correctly. So we're just gonna carefully turn this. For this part, I wasn't able to show you on this R1 due to the fact that the markings on this one was scraped off, but just to let you know how to adjust this clutch cover without obviously guessing, there's an arrow indicator on the clutch cover and there's gonna be a dot indicator on the shaft. Before you bolt down the clutch cover, you wanna make sure that those do align with each other. Once you align those together, you should be able to bolt on that clutch cover. The way you will know that you did it correctly is once you bolt it on, they should still be aligned. And we should be good at this point. We're gonna go ahead and put our spring in place. It shouldn't be too hard to do. You just gotta push it back into the groove and we can go ahead and put all our bolts back in. And we're gonna do these as star pattern as well. All right, so moving along to the oil pan. So we got this little tube here that we're gonna replace the two gaskets on it. So we're gonna remove those. And we're gonna clean this tube pretty good just to make sure there's no dirt on it. All right, we're gonna put our new seals on there. It's gonna be the same part number for both sides. All right, we got our new ones on there. Now we have here our oil pan. You wanna clean it as good as you can as well, now that you have the chance. Now this little tube just goes right in here, like so. And this side is actually gonna go up into the engine, which it's gonna go right in there into the water pump. Now for the oil pan gasket, I'm not gonna put any sealer on there. For me, there's no need for it. If you wanted to play it safe, however, you could do it the same way we did the clutch cover. I don't feel like it's necessary. So I'm just gonna put the gasket and just bolt it back up onto the engine. Now before I put the gasket here, make sure you have these pins in place. You have one that goes in front of the oil pan and the other one goes in the back of the oil pan. Gonna go ahead and set the gasket on the oil pan. And that's where those two pins come in handy because that actually holds the gasket in place. Now we're ready to put this back onto the bottom of the engine. Now for this part, I'm not gonna put it on camera because there's really no need for it. It's pretty simple. Just make sure that little pipe does insert into the water pump and then just basically just put all the bolts all the way around, and we're gonna do it exactly how we've been doing it, star pattern, because you do wanna make sure that pan is tight and evenly. So I'm gonna go ahead and take care of that and then I'll show you the next part after that. All right, so now we're moving on to the left side of the engine, and all we really have to install on this side side is just this oil sensor here. I did not have a new gasket for this one because this one's still pretty good, so I'm gonna reuse mine. And all that holds this one is 2 8mm bolts. You're simply just gonna insert it right back in, and it only goes in one way. Obviously the wire slides through this groove here, and then just tighten those 2 bolts and you should be good on that. Okay, so moving on to the last gasket we have to replace. It's gonna be the coolant gasket that sits pretty much in the same spot as the oil gasket that I mentioned in the beginning of this video. Make sure that the area is pretty clean before we install the new one. We're also going to be putting a little bit of grease on this seal. Then we're just going to simply insert it on the tube. Make sure it's all the way back to the lip, like so. And then we're just going to insert it back into the water pump. And now we have the tube fully in there. All that's left to put on is the bolt that holds it down on this side and the other bolt that holds this part of the tube. All right, so that's gonna be the end to this video, guys. I'm hoping that this helps somebody out there. I really wish that I started the video as I started removing everything, but since the parts took a while to get here, I thought, why not just go ahead and make the video anyway? So the only thing pretty much left at this point is just putting back the headers back on, which is pretty straightforward and easy to do. That's the reason why I'm not really adding that part. And also just a reminder, just double check all the coolant hoses that you have to remove are fully tightened back onto the engine, because the last thing you wanna do is put all that coolant in there and you're gonna have some coolant spill out while the engine is running. But other than that, it's not really a hard job to do. It's just like any other mechanic job. You just got to make sure that you put all your stuff nice and organized, because you don't want to mix all those bolts or parts, and then you're going to get confused on how to put everything back. The other thing I want to mention, guys, if you're a big fan of LAS fit bulbs, if you've seen my recent videos on putting LEDs on my truck, I do have a discount code, which is also beneficial if you decide to put LEDs on your bike, because they pretty much carry any bulb that you need. So hopefully you put some use on that and get yourself a little bit of discount. Like always, if you like what you see and you haven't subscribed already, please feel free to do so. Hit that like button for me if you want to continue on seeing these kind of videos to help you out. And that's going to wrap it up for this video, guys. Like always, God bless all of y'all out there. Good luck on your projects, and we'll see y'all on the next video.